Hello, my pals. Super Bowl Sunday. But we've got 40 minutes to go until the game, and it's time to learn some Talmud. Plenty of time. Who's in the house? Where are you tuning in from? We give the live audience a few seconds to chime in and catch us and find us in their news feeds. And to help others find AT Daily in their news feed, comment, share, like, reactions, action. We need actions because that signals to Facebook that we're doing something of value here. Lighting up the social media darkness. I'm curious, not only where are you tuning in from, but what's the furthest you've ever gone to learn something new? What's the furthest you've ever gone? What city did you go to that was the farthest away where you learned something? Claudia Steiner says shalom from Brazil. James Roth in the house from Indianapolis. Great to have you both. Cheryl in Indianapolis. Ooh, Cheryl and James, do you know each other? I know Indianapolis is a big city. It's unlikely. Who else is in the house? Today, we are going to be finishing chapter 4. Hello, Andrew Lewis Shivers. We're going to be finishing chapter 4 of the first volume of the Talmud, Berachos. We are on Daf 30, Daf Lamed, page 30 of Berachos. And within this page, we'll finish chapter 4 and begin chapter 5. Chapter 4 was focused on the circumstances surrounding the Amidah, the standing prayer, the basic prayer that we do 3 times a day, that a Jewish man is commanded to say 3 times a day. And we'll move more into the content of the Amidah, the mindset one adopts when in it, and what is the content, which is a lot of rules to do with it, but those rules are all closely tied to the spiritual philosophy of the prayer, right? So we're going to start getting into where does the prayer come from? What does it really mean? What are we saying when we say such and such, etc.? But first, let's finish up chapter 4, which is more about the circumstances of the Amidah. And we have been drawing a connection. We started this yesterday and continuing today, drawing a connection between the daily prayer and the traveler's prayer. So the traveler's prayer, the Tefillah Sederek, is when we're going on a trip. There's a special prayer for that. I read it in yesterday's show, but since we're talking about it now, it would be worth repeating. So the traveler's prayer, may it be your will, Lord our God, to lead us to peace, to direct our steps to peace, and guide us to peace, and rescue us from the hands of any enemy or ambush along the way, and send blessing to the work of our hands, and let us find grace, kindness, and compassion in your eyes and in the eyes of all who see us. Blessed are you, Lord, who hears prayer. That is the formula of the traveler's prayer. You can find it in a million places online if you're ever traveling. You don't have a copy with you, so while you're sitting on the plane or in the car, if you're not driving, you can Google Jewish traveler's prayer, and you will get that text. So the question is, what are the circumstances in which we can say it? In other words, okay, we're going traveling, we're going on a trip. Any trip will do. At what point in the trip do we start to say the prayer? Until when do we say the prayer? Etc. These same kinds of questions. And do we stand in order to say the prayer? And as we'll see, there's some connections between the traveler's prayer and the daily prayer. So, when we go traveling, ideally, we say this traveler's prayer as we're traveling, meaning once we're on the road. So if we're driving, right, so once we get on the road, but now we're going to pull over, right? Or ideally, if we're driving, but we're not the person driving, so once we get on the highway and we're leaving the city. In the old days, it was once you left the city, but we don't really live in such a condition where it's so clear, we live in a walled city, we leave the walls of the city, now we're clearly on the road, and once we're 70 cubits away from the city, that would be the ideal time to say the traveler's prayer. Now, you live in LA, you can get on the freeway and drive for 45 minutes and you're still in, metropolitan Los Angeles region. But basically when you're on the road, right? And some say you can even say it that morning before you depart for your trip once it's definite that you're going. But the preferred way to do it is once you're on the road. And so we have the habit when we're flying on a plane that as we pull away from the gate, because now that plane is moving out to the runway and it's all but certain to take off. Very rare that you return to the gate. So as you're leaving the gate and taxiing, that's a beautiful time to say the traveler's prayer. How should we say it? Since it is prayer, like the standing prayer, it is a prayer, right? Not an affirmation of God's unity like the Shema, but more of a supplication and praise. So ideally we say it standing, but it's not always convenient to say it standing. So it is equally meritorious to say it while sitting and traveling. If you have the opportunity, if it's convenient to get up and stand, so you should stand. But if the act of standing will make you uncomfortable, maybe because people are going to be staring at you and it's going to make you uncomfortable, and then you won't have the calm and focus needed to pray, so then stay seated. Also, if you're going to become agitated because you need to stop your journey in order to stand and pray, so then you don't need to stop. You can just say it, to yourself as you keep moving. That is okay. Our sages want us to achieve this calm and focus to help us in our journey. It shouldn't be that the act of praying is actually going to hamper the journey and make us a little agitated about that delay and possibly even endanger us. There's certain places where you just do not want to stop, right? Like you don't pull over on the freeway in order to do this. Ideally, you have a driver and you can do it in the passenger seat, or you can get off the exit in a place that makes sense and do it there. And to that end, so the teaching about this is that one on a donkey need not dismount to stop his journey to pray because he will not be focused and calm. And now this rule is going to also apply not just to the traveler's prayer, but to the prayer, to the standing prayer. So now we're talking about that you're sitting on a donkey. It's time for you to say the morning prayer, or that time is running out. That prayer it's not just, generally said standing, if possible said standing. Now we're talking about the standing prayer. We're no longer talking about the traveler's prayer. Now we're talking about the standing prayer, the Amidah. But when you're traveling, you're sitting on a donkey and moving, so you can stay seated on the donkey while you're saying the standing prayer, only in these conditions. Normally in our daily life, you'd have to say it standing, but when you're traveling, special dispensation. And I remember many of you have seen Moshe Storch, our musical director. Lately we haven't been making so much music on the show, but when you see us doing musical Hallel for Rosh Chodesh, or we went together to Uman, Ukraine twice, and I spent a lot of time, and Moshe's been on our show very often. He sings and plays guitar beautifully. And when we were together traveling to Ukraine for Rosh Hashanah, I learned from him that he learned from his father that is perfectly acceptable to say the morning prayers, all of them, including the standing prayer, while sitting in your seat on the plane. And here is the source for that, right? So when you're traveling, you need not get up from your donkey in order to pray the daily prayer. Which way should we be facing when we pray? Right? So in the United States, we're accustomed that most synagogues are oriented east, right? So you're facing east when you pray. Why? Because Israel is to the east from the United States. But synagogues in Africa, or south, if there was a synagogue in Saudi Arabia, maybe there is, I'm not sure. So you would be facing north toward Israel when you pray. If we are unable, for whatever reason, we're in a synagogue that it wasn't able to construct it that way, so you're facing east, or you're just in a situation where you're praying alone and you don't even know which way is east. You don't have a compass. The sky's overcast. You just don't know what direction is east. You're not able to physically turn yourself toward Israel from wherever you are on the globe. So then emotionally, you turn your heart toward your Father in heaven. Our sages say you turn your heart toward your Father in heaven. If you're in Israel, okay, so now you're in Israel. You can't face Israel. Where do you face when you're in Israel? You face Jerusalem. When you're in Jerusalem, which way do you face? The site of the temple. Now it would be the Temple Mount because the temple is not standing. But anywhere where you are in Jerusalem, when you pray, you would face toward the Temple Mount. If the temple is standing, right? So when Mashiach comes, when the Messiah comes, the third temple, we have a tradition, the third temple will go up instantly, like in one day, because God will build a third temple, and God is very fast contractor. He could just make that thing go up in one day. So now the third temple is here. Let's say you've merited, you're so blessed that you're standing in the temple courtyard. Which way do you face when you pray? You can't face the temple when you're in the temple. Now you face the Holy of Holies, the place where the Ark of the Covenant is housed. And if you are the Kohen Gadol, the high priest on Yom Kippur, and you're standing inside the Holy of Holies, because no one can enter the Holy of Holies except the high priest, and only on one day of the year, Yom Kippur, and only after extensive preparations, because if he is not fully, ready and purified and just completely ready to represent the people, he won't survive entering the Holy of Holies. It's that intense, the divinity of the Holy of Holies. And in ancient times, when the temple stood and we had the Kohen Gadol, the high priest, who would go in on Yom Kippur, when he would enter the Holy of Holies, they would actually tie a rope to his leg in case, God forbid, his heart was not pure enough, he wasn't prepared enough, and he would die inside the Holy of Holies, and then they couldn't get him out, right? Because nobody else can enter in there. So that's why they tied a rope to his foot, and then they would pull him out if, God forbid, he should expire while inside the Holy of Holies. Reminds me a little bit of people who climb Mount Everest, Tragically, people die on Mount Everest every year, and their bodies are still there because the conditions are so extreme, they can't get them off the mountain. No one, has the energy or ability to carry a dead body off Mount Everest, and so there's bodies up there. Sorry to be so grim. Let's move on. So those are the directions you face when praying. Another question comes up regarding the Musaf prayer, the additional prayer. So we pray 3 times a day, the morning, afternoon, and evening prayer. And then there's an additional prayer, which is added on Shabbat, on Rosh Chodesh, the beginning of the Hebrew months, or on festivals, on Pesach, on Shavuot, on Sukkot. There's a Musaf, right? On Shabbat, every Shabbat, there's a Musaf. This is the additional prayer, and it corresponds to the additional offering in honor of the Shabbat or the New Moon Festival or the other festivals. So this is a prayer service that is 100% linked to the offerings in the temple. The morning and afternoon services are also linked to the offerings in the temple. The evening prayer is not linked to the services in the temple because there was no evening offering, no evening sacrifice. But the additional prayer, which is linked to the additional offerings that were given in the temple, and so therefore it is definitely a communal obligation that was being satisfied by that communal offering, the additional offering in the Holy Temple. So since that prayer is definitely linked to a communal offering, so it has a communal nature to that prayer, so the question becomes, what if you're praying alone? What if you're in fact praying in a city where even the city doesn't have a minyan in it? There's not 10 Jews in the whole city. So it's like that city, it would be devoid of the obligation to bring a communal offering. So do you say the additional prayer, which corresponds to that communal offering, in a situation where it is clearly for the individual and not for the community? Answer, yes. Yes, the Musaf prayer became so regular for the nation that eventually it became obligated, and now the individual is obligated, even though he's not part of a minyan and not part of a community. So this idea that something which started as a custom became a commandment applies to the evening prayer as well for men. Right? So the evening prayer was originally optional, and it became obligatory because sort of all the men of Israel had the custom of doing the evening prayer for such a long time, for centuries, that custom took on the force of commandment. But for women who did not take on this optional prayer, the evening prayer, they didn't take it on, so it never became a commandment for them. Yesterday the question came up, so what are women's obligations and prayers? And I apologize that I didn't have it ready at my fingertips at that time, but I have since looked it up. And would you believe there's not a totally clear answer on this. So many things in Judaism, have multiple opinions, but there's usually the prevailing opinion. So as Nina mentioned in the comments yesterday, the prevailing opinion for women is that they're obligated to pray once a day. But actually, that's not quite true. The prevailing opinion of our rabbeim, of the rabbis, is that women are obligated to pray twice a day, to say the prayer, the Amidah, twice a day, morning and afternoon. They are not obligated to say Shema. Shema, which the Torah says is morning and evening requirement, that is a time-bound positive commandment, and women are exempt from time-bound positive commandments. But the obligation to pray, right, to beseech God, to give God our supplications, to praise and ask for our needs from God, is universal. It does apply to both men and women, and it is considered like a gift. It's a gift to us that we can pray. So women are not going to be left out of that gift. So women are obligated to pray. And basically, they're obligated to do the morning and afternoon prayer. But if they only do one of those, they have fulfilled their obligation. Unlike a man. A man is obligated to pray morning, afternoon, and evening. And if he doesn't do it 3 times, or if he misses one and he doesn't do the compensatory prayer at the next service, as we discussed yesterday, so then he has not fulfilled his obligation. Women will fulfill their obligation if they pray at least once a day, say the Amidah at least once a day, but it is better if they do twice, morning and afternoon. However, if a woman has a lot of kids and a lot of obligations and a lot of responsibilities, so then she's exempt. She doesn't even have to pray once a day. She should at least say the morning blessings and possibly the blessings of the Shema, the blessings before and after the Shema. They're just some basic blessings which can be said quickly. And when she's really busy and with, a lot of kids demanding her attention and, saying, save me, mommy, feed me, mommy, are we there yet, mommy, etc. So then she can be exempt even from the once a day obligation. But if there's any way that she can handle, those responsibilities and pray at least once a day, then that's what she should do. And ideally, she should pray twice a day, morning and afternoon. But she's exempt from the Shema. This is regarding the standing prayer, the Amidah. Okay. We covered that. We covered optional and obligatory, the difference between men and women. Finally, we have, and I see some questions are coming up. I'll come back to those at the end, which we're going to be at soon. But before we pray each day, we should evaluate, am I ready to pray? Right? So this is gorgeous. This should apply to everything we do. Everything of value that we do, we should ask ourselves before we do that thing, am I ready to do this thing? Am I in the right headspace to do that thing? Do I have the right tone, right? Am I Am I prepared? Am I spiritually and emotionally prepared to engage in this activity? And particularly, we're talking about prayer, right? Am I ready to pray? What does it mean to be ready to pray? It means that one's heart is calm and focused, and you have, you can enter into a state of self-abnegation, right? You understand that you're standing before the King of Kings, the creator of heaven and earth, your maker. And if you're just going to pop in and say all your prayers, okay, so then you're not standing before your maker. You're just thinking about all the stuff you need to do, the shopping list that you're going to get to after praying, etc. Right? This is the same idea as know before whom you stand. Right? So if you're going to stand before your maker, you got to make that real for yourself, right? And if you're really standing before a king, an earthly king, you would be kind of awed, right? You would feel awe. You would rejoice that you're getting that opportunity, but you will rejoice with trembling. So it's this beautiful idea of rejoice with trembling. So you have both fear and joy together. And if you haven't gotten into that state, I'm sorry, honey, I'm live on the air right now. So if you haven't gotten into that state, you need to get into that state, right? You need to get into a mood of fear and joy. Then you're ready to pray. The sources for that, as we look at Hannah. So Hannah would become the mother of the prophet Samuel. And she was a barren woman who felt that she was being mocked by her co-wife. This is in the book of Kings, you'll find this. And we read Hannah's story on, I think it's Rosh Hashanah, and how, she was really devastated the way that she was being treated by the rest of the family. And she prayed like with so much devotion that the high priest thought that she was intoxicated and told her that she should not come into the temple when she's drunk. And she said, I am not drunk. I'm a woman with a bitter heart, right? And her prayer was so real and so emotional that the priest really honored her and gave her a blessing. And then her prayer came true, and she had this son whom she then dedicated to the temple service. He ended up becoming a prophet, a great and important prophet, the prophet who would anoint the first king of Israel. So we want to be like Hannah. Also, we want to be like David, right? So David danced before the Lord. The Lord was entirely real to David. He rejoiced before the Lord, and he was awed by the Lord. And David in Psalm 2 says you need to serve the Lord in fear, which is awe, and rejoice with tremblings, right? So the same idea of rejoice with trembling when we come before the Lord to pray. We're also told that every time we pray, every time we do the standing prayer, the Amidah, we want to introduce a personal element into that prayer to make it real and authentic for us, right? We want to supplicate the Lord, petition the Lord for the things we really need, that we really care about. Because that's how you get real with God, right? When you tell him what you really need, what you're afraid of, what you're longing for, what you're bereft about, where you're sad, why you are soaking your couch with tears, the things that you care about most, you want to get honest with God and tell him those things. While it is true that we want to incorporate this, original, individual, authentic element to all our prayer, we don't want to get swept away with a wave of enthusiasm so great that we just, lose all the sort of formula of prayer and only do our own thing. And the reason for that is we're part of a community, and we need to be a member of that community in our prayers. And so we do recite the prayers that have been formulated for us by our tradition, by our sages, all these thousands of years ago. We do want to pray as the community prays, and using the prayers that the community uses. We add our own personal element to it, but we don't replace the established prayer only with our personal prayers, right? So you want to, like everything, there's moderation, right? There's a limit. You need to get personal, but it can't be only personal. You need to be emotional, but you can't get swept away with the emotion. It's finding that balance. And it's for this reason. And why? Because if we do only the personal, we can get so caught up in the enthusiasm of that and just praying for what we want and what we need that we might end up praying for things that are outside the fundamental tenets of our faith, right? And our faith is complicated. The laws of the Jews are quite complicated, and that's why we need educated people and why we need rabbis, right? Rabbis are not intercessors between us and God. There's no one between you and God. Every person has his own or her own connection with the Lord. And you don't need any clergyman to speak for you, between you and God. But because there are so many laws and they're often so complicated, and even if you know all the laws, situations come up that like you just can't figure out. So that's why you need access. You need a rav. You need a rabbi in your life that you can ask questions of as they come up, because invariably they will come up and you need advice from somebody more learned than you. And even the most learned rabbi, no matter how learned he is, he will have his rabbi because you need somebody who's objective about you, right? Somebody who can look at your situation and understand better than you will understand it when you're standing in it. All right, those are the points that we wanted to make as we entered chapter 5 of Berachos. Here we are on page 30, Daf Lamed. That's where we're holding. And now I'll just look at a few more questions that have come up in the comments. Let's see, there's a long one. Brian Stapp says, question regarding men and women prayer obligations. Given the reason for the obligation, as Tate's yesterday, was due to women not being obligated in the ways of men, or due to women's duties at home, etc. Since in modern times there are role reversals in the family, are the men and women prayer obligations the same in those families, and why? What a great question. So he's saying that now you will find families where the woman is the breadwinner and the husband is taking care of the kids more and more. I mean, it's quite common. And it can be a very beautiful situation for the family, for the kids, etc. There's no critique of that from a Jewish perspective. Interestingly, you're still going to have male obligations that females don't have, right? So in Orthodox Judaism, you're not going to have an obligation for a woman, no matter how she works. She's not going to be obligated to put on tefillin. And other things like that. And men are going to have an obligation to pray 3 times a day. If, his child-rearing responsibilities are going to interfere with praying 3 times a day, this is a great question for a rabbi. I can't answer it. But what I will say is that nothing takes the place of life and death issues, right? So if you're charged with responsibility for a child, right, his life is literally in your hands, and getting distracted or, just focusing your attention on something else, even if it's prayer, is going to somehow endanger the child. So for sure, you're going to be excused. But most situations are not that extreme. So I think this is an excellent question, and I don't have the answer. Of course, it's going to be a situation about it depends. Just like we do have in the Talmud that, a woman who has less responsibilities, right? Let's say now her children have grown and they're no longer in the house. And so she was excused from praying twice a day, the ideal amount for a woman, the morning and afternoon prayer. But now her responsibilities have eased up. So even though she became accustomed to not having that obligation, now she's in a situation where she can fulfill that obligation, and she should. So maybe that part of that reasoning will apply to that situation where the woman is actually the breadwinner with all the responsibilities that go with that, and the husband is the children's caretaker with all the responsibilities that go there. But I don't have full answers on that question. Okay, I don't see any other questions. So great to learn with you. Tomorrow, with God's help, we'll move on to page 31 of Berachos. And, and Nina's got an answer there also to Brian, so you can look into the comments for that. People who are going to be watching the Super Bowl, enjoy it. I don't know who's going to win. We're rooting for a good game. But I have heard, and you can Google this, I can't remember where you find it, but for people who would rather not, see scantily clad musicians during the halftime, they're fine to watch sports, but they don't want to watch immodestly dressed musicians during the halftime performance. There's going to be a live stream of some very entertaining Jewish thinkers and leaders. Charlie Harari, Y.Y. Jacobson, Yoel Gold are all going to be teaching Torah during halftime of the Super Bowl. And I don't know exactly what platform they're doing that on, but I'm sure if you Google Super Bowl halftime Torah, you will find those live streams if you are interested in that. Look at that, Soren Kirchner, hey from Saigon. That's a new one for us. Welcome, Soren. Welcome to you tuning in from Saigon. How cool. Vietnam in the house. All right, my pals. Great to be learning with you. Sending you big love from the West Coast.